Whether designing a brand new school or renovating an existing building, the design of a school starts with educational planning. Welcome back to What's the Scope with Finegold Alexander Architects, the podcast where we share our hands on approach to projects and how we love to celebrate design that is boundless. I'm Madison Mercado, and this is the second episode of our three-part series on school design for the back-to-school season. Today I'm sitting down with two of our staff to discuss all things educational planning and working with the community on their new school.
I'm Leah Wolkovich-Quartey. I'm a project architect at Finegold Alexander, working on the Joseph Case Junior High School project in Swansea. And I love working on school jobs because I am a great big nerd and I think education is awesome. And if we can have anything to do with making education more enjoyable for students, then I just think that's awesome.
And I'm Ron Lamarre, Senior Associate and Project Manager with Finegold Alexander. I think that, my goal in life is to be a lifelong learner, and I love to bring that to the built environment. And one way to do that is through K-12 schools.
Nice. Glad to have you here today. I just want to start with, since we're talking about educational planning, if you could just kind of tell the audience what that is exactly before we get into the specifics.
Sure. So ed planning is, and we've described this before with clients, that we're not building a building, we're building a school. We're building a place of education. So what that means is that you're really building or designing or planning, and it all starts with the planning process of designing the building from the inside out and getting down to the nuts and bolts of education in terms of teaching and learning, so that any space that's designed after the fact through that planning process is crafted around responding to the problems and the solutions and the future of that community's education in terms of both the teaching and the learning.
Just to kind of get started with our questions, first thing I wanted to talk about was how do you engage with educators and students to design the educational environment that is right for them?
So user group meetings are really important for us. We do them on all of our K-12 projects, and it's an opportunity for us to talk to everyone at the school. So the administrators are hugely involved in the entire process, but the user group meetings are really a chance for us to get to talk to the teachers and the students and find out what their day-to-day looks like, what they love about it, what's not working for them, so that in the new school we can address those concerns but keep what makes their school and make it special. And that's how every school project is different, because every school community is different.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think those user group meetings are a way to make sure that the community understands that these schools are going to be here for generations. So anything that we're doing today has to span generations of education that we don't know how that's going to evolve. So how do we actually work with them to make sure that these learning environments are actually environments of engagement? Like, how does the whole community benefit from these places? And we try to think of them as both spaces and places during the planning process. Because when you engage the client and you talk to them about this, it's hard for them to think about this in the form of a paradigm shift. In other words, how do you create a building that's going to evolve over time as other things such as education and teaching and community needs and the community itself continues to evolve over time? And I think at Finegold Alexander, one of the things that kind of brings itself to the forefront is the FA energy, the sustainability, the adaptive reuse. We kind of bake that into every project, thinking we're not just adapting your new school or building you a new school, but we're thinking about how can it be adapted in the future.
An opportunity. So everything that Ron just said, from sustainability or future use of the building, but also opportunities for teachers and students. So how can they collaborate? How can they do that formally? How can they do that informally? And what sorts of spaces can we provide within the building within the school that allows for different kinds of interactions that maybe they'd only dreamed of before, hadn't even thought of before, because their previous school was maybe a little more restrictive and they were separated from other groups that they thought might be fun to work with. So it really gives everybody an opportunity to think big before we make it real.
Right. Do you find that ideas end up a little too outside of the box before you guys get into what's actually possible?
I don't think anything's too far out of the box. Just as some examples, I mean, we've, in my career anyway, have designed spaces that are multifunctional, have designed spaces that are very much, as Leah just said about this collaboration piece and kind of getting everybody together, they're kind of town centers within learning environments, including things like fireplaces, including things like, performance pits, if you will. So we've brought kind of the idea and creativity to an owner's suggestion that we need something new, we need something different, we need something that talks about us here in our community. So I don't think anything's outside the box, and it's always, I find the most successful schools are the ones that are completely different and completely tailored to a specific community.
What does the process look like when you translate the educational plan that you've created with all of the different stakeholders in the community over to the actual design?
So it starts off pretty simply, actually, and taking all of the components that we've identified in that educational plan, all of the spaces that the school, the administrators, the students have decided need to be incorporated, and we lay it all out. And then the first mission is making sure the right spaces are next to each other. Some are pretty obvious, like the kitchen needs to go next to the dining area, but then there are others that might not be as obvious, and we play with whether science all wants to be together or does science want to be next to language arts, so that there could be a collaboration there. And it really depends on that, again, that conversation with the user groups and how they want those different spaces to come together. But it's an understanding of how their school works and who needs to be near who, and we start doing our best to get that on paper, and sometimes it takes a little while to get the right configuration.
Yeah, I think what you just asked is the most difficult part of the process. We come up with the planning ideas and concepts and their vision of their new school, whether it's an addition renovation or a complete renovation or a new ground up facility. It should look, smell, and taste like a new learning environment. And if we're really thinking about the future, those spatial adjacencies that Leah's mentioning, that also comes in hand with how will this not look like what we have now? How will this not be something that's going to pigeonhole the learning? Or, what people see today, what they're used to today, are schools that were designed a long time ago, where everybody was taught the same thing in the same way. And there's something to be said for that, because you cannot have one teacher for every 3 or 4 students. So, we have to kind of bridge that gap of how do you educate everyone in large mass with a certain number of educators, but also in doing it in such a way that allows independence of the students to create, the students to think, the students to evolve and to learn at their own pace, with their own ways, within their own learning styles. How do you accomplish that? And these spaces that Leah are talking about, in terms of like, how are they located within the building? How are they organized? How is the entire building organized? That's the most difficult piece. And then you have to come up with, architecturally, you have to come up with what's the big idea, right? What's the partie, as we call it. But what is that overarching meaning of the school? And to put all that on paper and then present it to an owner in understandable terms, because they're not planners and they're not architects, they're educators. And so to have them be able to envision what it is that we are suggesting is not an easy process. And so it's one of the things that we take to mind when we start a project, because what we're really doing is building the engine to the car. And without the engine, it's just a pretty car. And so we want to make sure that what we're doing is sound and appropriate, and what we want to do from that original concept piece, because everything else is derived from that.
Are there certain tools that you guys use to help when you're presenting to the client to make them understand the different things that you're looking at other than just explaining it to them?
So precedent images are really useful because that's one way that we can say, this is one way that a school has done it previously. What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? We've also done, I think, an exercise that's been pretty useful for us, which is this or that. And we'll give them a couple of different ways that a library could be organized, for example, or a dining commons, how open, how enclosed. And so we'll show them kind of a traditional example versus one that might be a little more out of the box, and see how the different groups of students and the different teachers react to that, and see which way they're leaning so that we can get a sense of how that might start to show itself in 3 dimensions. And I think having pictures is one way that someone who can't read a plan, can't read a section, can get a sense of, oh, that's what they mean by this. Oh yeah, I love that. Or, oh no, that's not what I thought you were saying. I don't like that at all. So that's definitely something we use a lot.
And this imagery is not only schools. So the idea is not to kind of say, well, here's this or that school. We bring pictures in or images in from everything out in the world. So we could look at different spaces within different types of building types. We can look at community spaces. We can look at outdoor spaces, indoor spaces, rooftop spaces. How do you create something that maybe doesn't exist already? And bring that to them and visually get them to understand that, yeah, that space would be great, even though they're not looking at a school space. They're looking at a space that, may be part of a public library, maybe part of an office culture, maybe part of a store, quite frankly. So that's what we really try to do, is we try to bring an understanding of space and an understanding of multifunctional use within those spaces to our clients, so that they understand, hey, this will work for us. We're actually thinking outside the box, or we're thinking around things. We're not just looking at other schools that have been done for other clients and other communities as something to pick and choose from.
Do you have some of those same challenges when you're presenting these ideas and what's actually able to go into the final design once you're further along into the process, like through construction, to make sure that everything still matches what they wanted, what you wanted, and then what's actually feasible in a school?
We do, except, I think the I wants, it's a funny phrase. I don't think that designers or architects should ever be talking about what they want, because it's not about what they want. It really is, what does the building want? As we start talking about the planning and how the planning evolves and how the spaces are starting to evolve, the culture of the space, which is derived from the community, from everything from colors to materials to fabrics, as that all starts evolving, we should have the conversation of, okay, what's next? As opposed to I want. What's next? How does this connect to this, and how does that connect to that? And I think one of the things that's so important is to do it in such a way that everything is so meaningful and so important. We talk about less is more all the time. So I think the one strength that architects and designers can bring to a project and to an owner is all their previous experience. There's no reason why any building is value engineered, if in fact we've been thinking about doing things effectively and efficiently, that's easy to build, that provides everything that needs to be provided in a way that builds on 20, 30 years of experience that these firms bring to their clients. It just makes sense to do it right the first time and not have to, quote unquote, value engineer a project, because what you're really doing is you're chopping cost. And if it's done right the first time, you can't lose anything. So that budget should be built from the ground up and not from the top down.
Right, and I think building off of what Ron was saying, it's really about holistic thinking and big picture thinking, because from the beginning, when you're laying out these spaces in plan, you should still be thinking about the budget and energy use and sustainability, and all of those choices should be cooking at the beginning, even though some choices need to get made earlier and some aren't going to come until later in the pipeline. They all need to be working together, because then that's how you build a strong design. Otherwise, yeah, you get to a point at the end and you're just looking for places to shave and cut and reduce. But if you're looking at all of the pieces fitting together from a very early stage, then you almost can't do that later, because it's all so integrated that if you start moving one puzzle piece, then you start affecting all of them, and then ultimately you end up affecting your educational plan, which is the last thing anyone wants to do. So it's really about making sure all of the components merge early in the process and get brought up together.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how you and the rest of the project teams actually work directly with the clients and the educators and people of the school community through the full design process, just even past the visioning, and you've already decided what they want, big picture, but now you're getting like nitty-gritty details?
Yeah, I think material selections is important, to make sure that what you're building is going to last for generations. One thing that we emphasize is the value. What is the value that's coming out of what is being created? It's not only a return on their investment and kind of demonstrating that return on their investment, but talk about long-term sustainable value, like Leah just talked about. How do we do that in such a way that 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now, that building is still thriving, the community still loves it. Obviously, it will be being used in a completely different way that nobody ever even envisioned, when we were putting it together. So, how do you embed all those things? And in doing that, I think robust conversations with the community about what their values are, what they find to be important, what are the things that they insist upon. Because it is an incredible investment from a community to do any kind of school facility. And they're not just investing in a building, they're investing in the future of their community and the future of their kids. So, I think that's one of the things that we always want to talk to them about.
And more specifically, as far as including clients in the design process, it depends on the project, but we have done different projects in the firm where we incorporate parts of the students' daily life, and sometimes the students are actually generating artwork that get incorporated into murals, or sometimes there have been wall graphics that are like historic moments of the town or historic moments of the school that get worked into some kind of display. So we're always trying to find those opportunities that make the school, make the population special, and they can have a voice on what they want to see reflected. So we'll do workshops or brainstorming sessions with various groups within the school to get those ideas and see how we can work some of that into the project at the end too.
And it's not just during the design process. We've done projects during our careers where students are engaged in actually, shadowing the project as it gets engineered, as it gets designed, as the projects are put together. We use tools such as Revit and Rhino and Grasshopper, and these students know how to use those as well. Even programs like SketchUp. And so the students kind of shadow the project. And then during construction, we're building a school, so why not take advantage of this? I think every student within the entire community should have chances to tour the site, see the building at different phases as the foundations are done, the site work is done, the framing is done, the building envelope is built, to really understand like how things go together. we find that students are very inquisitive and they really enjoy those things. And what better way for a student to kind of graduate from the 12th grade and say, yeah, back when my elementary school was being built, I was in the 5th grade and I learned all about these things. It kind of opens their eyes to the trades. It opens their eyes to the engineering, the graphics, all the murals that Leah's talking about. So there are so many different career paths that they could be exposed throughout the planning, design, detailing, bidding, and construction of a school. That just, again, brings a whole another level of value to the entire community.
Yeah, I didn't think about that, about how it kind of opens their eyes to other careers too, especially if you're working, even if you're working on high school and it's like fresher in their minds, or they're about to figure out what they want to do post-grad. Seems like it would be really important for these kids as they're trying to figure out what they want to do. Yeah,
even discussions about the health clinic that's going to be in the school. How does that actually tailor itself and support people, right? So they get their eyes open to that. I mean, we have discussions all the time with the first responders, whether it be the police department or the fire department, building services, so they, students will have the ability to say, oh, so they actually thought about what if something happens at the school, how does the fire department get around the building? Where do they put the trucks? Where do they put the, assembly points and things like that? And so, having students kind of recognize that it really does take a whole group of different disciplines to put a school together. Kind of opens their eyes to the idea that if they really want to do anything, it has an impact on everything else in the world.
And it all comes back to what we were saying earlier on. It's opportunity. Taking advantage of every opportunity, whether it's in the final built environment or as the building's being built. It just, any new possibility, I think, is exciting to get students involved in the project.
Yeah, that's really cool. As an aside, I kind of wonder if they're doing that at the high school that I went to. It's currently under construction right now, and my younger brother and sister are both there, or like attending the school as it's basically under construction. So I kind of wonder if they've done anything like that. They've involved the students. Yeah, I haven't heard anything, but yeah, I gotta ask. You should kind of answered that last question altogether, but other thing I wanted to ask, kind of building off of that, was, I know Ron, you said it's not really about what the architect wants, but in the process, is there in the educational planning process and the design process, is there a part of it that both of you value the most because you know that this is really like what you wanted to do, or how much you enjoy how it's like giving back to these communities?
So I think that, yes, we bring things to the table. So there are times when, during my career, I've referred to things as stealth sustainability and stealth health, because the clients don't know what they don't know, right? And so many times there's not a question about, how do we make the school very healthy for students? How do we bring that piece into it? And so if they weren't going to ask that, then we were going to provide it anyway. And I think what we find clients value the most is when the project is complete and they look at their absenteeism and they look at the asthma rates and they look at the health of their students and they realize that everything is actually coming down and settling, and saying that, boy, it seems like, the facility itself is a lot healthier. There's no off-gassing. It doesn't smell like our old school. These locker rooms, for some reason, they don't smell. And, the food, we talk about nutrition. So when we have an opportunity to have the user group meetings, like Leah said, we can engage the food service people and talk to them about, what choices are you going to have in the cafeteria? How can we design the dining facility so that it gives these students those opportunities? And then when it comes to sustainability, the idea that they don't have to use any chemicals, they don't have to buy a lot of cleaning agents to clean the school, they're just using a mild soap and water. And these materials are going to last for a very long time. And then they get their utility bill and they're shocked because it's so low. And we just say, yeah, that's, it's all part of the process, because there are a ton of items or a lot of nuts and bolts that go into this that we make sure the client understands, like what it is that we're providing and we're suggesting and the reason we do it. And that goes back to the value discussion. How do we take advantage of some of these technologies that are around today, not because they're cool and not because they're, fad, I guess you'd call it, or a trend in today's environment, but what does it actually mean to you in terms of dollars and cents? Because as schools pay for the construction of what they're doing, they're also paying the operational costs. And so if we can reduce the amount of money that they're spending on the facility, both in operations and maintenance and fuel, then we've done our job.
So I kind of have two answers to that question. One is, and I mean, I completely agree with what Ron said too, but that's his answer. I love existing buildings, and I know it's not always possible. Sometimes communities need to start from scratch because the building just is not suitable for their needs, either because of the site or the size or how it was built. And sometimes you have to start from the ground up. But I think anytime that we can take a historic building and restore it and bring it up to where we are now and give it a new life, I just think that's such an incredible opportunity to knit the past with the future and show that you don't have to just discard everything that was there. There really is a way to take what you have and bring it forward and learn and grow. And so I love those opportunities. And then for me too, it's not necessarily the design process itself, but just school should be a safe place to go. And it should be something, I know not all kids look forward to it, but it should be a comfortable, safe place to be. So anything that we can do as designers to help support that, so whether it's reliable meals and snacks throughout the day, or a place to wash your clothes because you might not reliably have that at home, or books in the library, any of that, anything that we can provide that just makes school safe and comfortable and enjoyable, that's why we do it.
Thank you for listening to What's the Scope with Finegold Alexander Architects. This episode was produced and edited by Madison Mercado, with music from the YouTube Music Library. Tune in next week to hear about collaboration in the furniture selection and design process. Find us at FAAINC.com and connect with us on LinkedIn and Instagram at Finegold Alexander Architects. See you next week.